Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Thanks, Don. Welcome, everyone, to our continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions on cybersecurity maturity model certification. Since it's the end of summer, we thought we'd spice things up by having two guests instead of one. So hopefully that isn't too spicy for this family event. We've got Allison Giddens and Mike Baker joining me today. Also, Wade Forbes, our sketch note artist, is going to be drawing this in real time. So we'll send that out to those of you who are attending after we finish. I want to mention that we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the Defense Industrial Base. Our focus at NeoSystems as a managed service provider is on organizations that are seeking certification under CMMC. That's mostly who we have in our audience today. If you're in the audience and you have some questions, please send those in on the Zoom Q&A feature, and I'll try to work those questions in. I'll start with some introductions of our guests. Allison Giddens worked for small business manufacturer WinTech, an aerospace precision machine shop, for 14 years before buying the company in 2020. She and her business partner, John Hudson, now serve as co-presidents. They're leading that 32-year-old company through the pandemic and into CMMC. Mike Baker is been leading the cybersecurity charge at General Dynamics Information Technology for 5 years as their CISO. Prior to that, he worked for Ernst & Young doing audit work for over 13 years, establishing him as an industry veteran with a broad vision, deep operational experience. Both Allison and Mike are volunteers on the CMMC accreditation body's Industry Advisory Council, helping to ensure the voice of industry is heard by those that are forming the CMMC ecosystem. So today they're going to be discussing their efforts to stay close to CMMC within their own companies and also their role on that Industry Advisory Council. Welcome. Thanks both of you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Let's start with what you're doing with your own companies with respect to CMMC. I just really want to see, as we're a ways into this now, we've been looking at it for a year and a half, so a little more. How has CMMC changed your priorities as leaders? Specifically, the decisions you're making, are you doing things differently today than you were, prior to CMMC coming around?
Sure, I can kick us off there. So fortunately for us, it's us at WinTech, we are about 46 employees strong, small business aerospace machine shop. And it's been a little bit less of a culture shock, and it's been more of just a shift of finding the balance of security without putting up roadblocks for a company that's so used to being flexible. So there were a lot of best practices we were already doing, which thank God for that, but there were still a lot of improvements that could be made. So part of the beauty of working for a small business is knowing that we can be nimble and flexible. And it's interesting on the priorities as leadership, because we've got to make sure that we're not just putting up roadblocks for roadblocks and effectively shooting ourselves in the foot for business.
Mike, what about on your side?
Yeah, no, on ours, it didn't really change the way we did business as a company. Again, Allison, I love being on these things with Allison, particularly here on these sorts of events, and also the Industry Advisory Council that we both serve on, because she represents the small business, which is, really the people and the companies that I care about in terms of the effect of CMMC. For a company like GDIT or GD as a whole, we've been operating with these sorts of controls and requirements for some time now, even before DFAR 7012. So for us, it didn't change the nature or manner in which we were doing business or securing our systems. But I mean, what it did drastically change, as I've talked about before, is our responsibility as it relates to our custodianship of our supply chain in terms of how they plan to comply. Before, we had executive attention and we'd get contractual requirements, we'd pass that down and we'd be good to go. But CMMC has been a drastic shift, despite this pause that we're in the summer. There's been a drastic shift in terms of how our business has viewed our responsibilities as a prime or as a larger prime contractor in the industry. So a lot of our efforts have been around not only ensuring that our own house is in order, which we were kind of there anyway, but just making sure we're audit ready and things like that, but really reaching out to our small business partners, our vendors and our subcontractors to make sure that they're ready to rock, which is part of the reason why we lean in and do events like this and Industry Advisory Council and other panels around. So that's really what we've been doing. I think the challenge that we have right now is keeping the momentum up. I think, we had an event yesterday in which we said, I believe DoD is still in the midst, like maybe the third month of their 1 month program review of CMMC. And the biggest challenge now is keeping the focus on it, right? Keeping the momentum going, right? Keeping the message out there that this will come at some point in some shape or form. There will be cybersecurity requirements in the contracts. It maybe is a year late from what the original intention was, but we need to continue to make progress right now.
So you're both giving pretty different answers. I think you're at opposite ends of the size spectrum in terms of companies, both in the DIB, but you're really in also different industries as well as being different sizes, right? IT versus manufacturing. How do you see the approach to CMMC changing with scale? Like, I think we've heard the story that you just illustrated from other companies, right? Mike, you're saying we were already doing this. We already had some of that maturity. Allison, you're saying this is a pretty impactful culture shift. So how and why is CMMC different as we go from small companies to big companies?
So Mike, what do you think? You want to go first? Or you want me to
I think you should go first on this.
Okay. All right. So for small businesses, we don't have the leverage by ourselves. We don't have the voice by ourselves that can speak up loudly enough. And a lot of the business owners don't necessarily have time because they're busy running the business portion. But to top that off, I think there are nuances involved with the smaller businesses, whether it's IT or manufacturing. So for example, a lot of small businesses our supply chains are determined by our larger customers, in many cases, the primes. So the primes provide approved suppliers lists and limit those who we can go to for the things underneath us. So for example, everything from material to ball lock pins to anodizing houses. And this is all manufacturing based, obviously, but in some of those cases, and depending on those specifications, those lists of approved suppliers are already very short. They're quite short. And what happens in the CMMC world down the line when there are already strained processing houses in terms of demand and workload, and they decide that CMMC might be too cost prohibitive to pursue, or they might discover they cannot get to it in time. So now my approved processor lists from my primes have gotten shorter. So unintended consequences, now the demand for the remaining on that list just increased. Does that mean longer lead times ultimately for my customer, the prime, and ultimately government? Or does that mean more expensive lot charges? Are we increasing the risk by ultimately funneling CUI to certain companies that might not have received as much CUI as before? So these are all things I think in the small business world, the picture gets magnified the closer you get to the bottom.
Yeah, and I mean, jumping on that, I think it's hard to follow that, but some of the things that we've been seeing in our supply chain is again, we rely on small businesses just as the U.S. government does as kind of the cornerstone of innovation, right? Like, and for us, my biggest thing is if we're going to have people exiting the market, what's the business impact of that? Do we have plans and resiliency things in place to make sure that we can continue to deliver on the contracts that we have? And I think one of the biggest things when we talk to small businesses, really, there's due to generally perhaps a lack of specific cyber expertise of that company, maybe even a lack of specific IT expertise in that company. There's a huge reliance on either outsourced labor or MSPs or other service providers that really need to step up also and kind of lead the charge in terms of the compliance here. So what we're seeing here is based on maybe some of that limited in-house expertise, I'm seeing some small businesses have some failure to just start, right? And I don't have a specific example here, and I'm glad Allison's shaking her head because this is a big focus of us within the IAC is, if you don't have a place to start, over analyzing the requirements or kind of, trying to dictate them down to the lowest levels, probably not what you want to do. You want to engage an expert like myself, a prime or a larger company that you can have a discussion with. You can engage the IAC if you have, but our goal here is just to start, right? It's progress, not perfection at this point in time, which I know is opposite of what CMMC is, which is no poems and perfection. But from my perspective, I want to see some progress. And a lot of the conversations that I've had, I'm a little bit taken aback by some of the questions where you're already way down the rabbit hole on some of the nuances Allison mentioned on the requirements, rather than doing the small things right. So we talked yesterday, and we, quite frankly, talked within the IAC and the practice effectiveness group of the need to prioritize the requirements, right, based on risk, create some sort of standard language or standard architecture models for how to implement those requirements in a compliant fashion, right, along a maturity scale, so that people have the resources, companies have the resources to bring those to a service provider or bring those to their in-house people if they have the expertise, and just get started, right? Because when this final rule hits, whenever it does hit, we're going to have to get our act in order in a pretty short fashion.
One of the things I see is that you mentioned, Mike, the sort of, getting progress, right? And, moving out. One of the big barriers to progress I see is that the smaller companies can't afford to make a mistake, right? They don't have a big IT infrastructure where they can try something on a small scale. When they try something, it's their entire IT that they're trying it on, right? There's no little pilot place somewhere. If you've got, Allison, you said 46 people, right? When you pilot it, it's your entire company. So if you make a mistake, it's an expensive one. Any thoughts on that? I mean, any thoughts on how we can get past that barrier?
Well, I think that there are you can get creative on piloting internally. So made me think of an example that we actually did not too long ago. When we moved from an on-prem to cloud, what we ended up doing was we didn't know how that was going to take to our core group of computer or workstation users that were accessing CUI. And we said, all right, we're not going to just all of a sudden overnight spring on them, hey, guess what? New processes, new procedures. So what we did was we said, okay, we're going to take the finance department, and we are going to put their information, which, oh, by the way, wasn't CUI, their information in the cloud, and we're going to set things up on those pertinent user workstations, and give it some time. Say, here's how you access this data, here's how you save it locally, here's how you do this, here's how you do that, and get feedback from them, and ultimately create training documents and create the policies and procedures. And then from there, we were able to learn, okay, that worked with finance. Now let's take it to purchasing, and let's do something similar. And okay, now let's take this to quoting. So you can get creative as a small business, and even if it's as small as one user to test something out, it's, to your point, it's not like it's cheap. It's not like, okay, well, we're going to run two systems at the same time and, oh, a piece of cake, money grows on trees. But I think if you do it with something deliberate in mind and with purpose, to Mike's point, you got to start, you got to get going. The hardest part is starting, and we've got to focus on that progress, not perfection.
Small, medium, or large business, right? Allison just mentioned you're either going to pilot on one person, 5 people, or a department. Doesn't matter if it's a 30,000 person company or an 80 person company. All that is time, right? And the thoughtful application of that at different scales, I don't see it as any different. I am obviously sensitive to the investment decision that goes into that, because you're going to have to really test it out on that 5 users before you really put this focused investment in. But it's no different than what I would do testing it on 200 users, right? I think, again, we also can't have a fear of failure to a certain degree. And I think that kind of paralyzes some of the analysis here. I mean, I go back to some of the capabilities that I brought in our shop, definitely way off 100% hit rate here. I'm way lower than that. But there's things like multi-factor authentication, things like that are mature in the market that you should bring in now. And to Allison's point, again, if you're not starting out with those test cases, if you're not giving yourself enough time to pilot that and make a thoughtful decision with those precious dollars, then you're going to do yourself a disservice towards the end of this year or next year when you say, whoops, I'm out of time, and I have to make a hasty decision that could result in a poor investment that doesn't meet the objective.
Agreed. Better to be testing it out now while you have time on your side.
Oh, you should have been testing out last year. Let's be serious.
Many people.
This is not the first CMMC Town Hall I think either of us have been on, right? So, this is and again, I'd say that a little flippantly, and I don't mean to be, flippant with that. But again, these are not new requirements. It's just a new certification or oversight and governance structure around it. And we don't know how that's going to look, to be completely honest, in the final rule, but there will be some more oversight. So yeah, it's time. In time.
So CMMC has been, really, for what we've seen is it's been driving some real wholesale changes for people that are beyond just their security. I think people originally thought maybe we'll bolt on some security, we'll put some effort on security, we haven't spent some money there, let's give it some attention. But what they're finding is that it's driving a lot of IT transformation, cloud adoption, outsourcing, more of a combined SecOps kind of approach. Is you see this, is it scope creep, or is that intentional outcome of these regulations? In other words, this sounded like a cybersecurity regulation. Is it intentional that it's having such an impact on IT?
I would hope it would have an impact, but let's also not discount the fact that you can't turn on 60 Minutes every Sunday without seeing a cybersecurity news piece, right? So what you're talking about, more of technical capabilities to enable businesses to have adequate cybersecurity as required by our U.S. government customer, our DoD customer, right? So, where you go to get those capabilities, to me, is less of the issue. I think the most important thing that's happening is it's not related to CMMC, but cyber's become front and center as a business risk. There's no denying it now, right? We've had organizations taking cyber seriously for a long time. We've had a lot that kind of push it to the side of as an afterthought. But what I've seen in the industry recently, regardless of size, particularly within the U.S. government contracting space, is you cannot escape this now, right? After post SolarWinds world, post Exchange, post significant ransomware events that continue to hit every day. This is a boardroom issue in any size company. And I think that's driving more change for the investment in something like CMMC than even CMMC itself. So that's my comment there. I kind of went off on a little tangent as it relates to your service providers, but that's where I'm at. And I think it's great. I mean, this is where, as cybersecurity practitioners, we wanted to be in the conversation. This is now a business risk. It's a business risk in the ransomware world. It's a business risk in the CMMC world as it relates to what your supply chain can be to achieve the mission. So we need to, harness this time and make sure that we make the necessary improvements that are expected of us.
Allison, you want to jump in on that as well?
I totally agree. It's like waking up one day and saying, I think I'm going to become an Olympic marathon runner. It's like, Allison, how about getting your mile down below 15 minutes first? So, I mean, there's kind of something for that. There's like, we can't sit here and say, well, you should just be able to jump into a lot of these cybersecurity requirements without making sure that, your server is not 10 years old. So there are a lot of things there that, to me, at first glance, it's like, well, yeah, of course people are thinking about cloud, because that would help them not only check the box on some other security things they've not even prioritized, but yeah, ultimately, I think it's all about the adoption of technology that you think is going to get you to that next level.
Let's also get in. I'm going to go way off on a tangent now, Ed, so just bear with me. Right, this is also the evolution of cybersecurity leadership too in this year, right? So when I became the CISO 6 years ago, I didn't know how to spell supply chain risk management. Now I'm pretty much I'm a supply chain, at least government contracting supply chain, pseudo expert, right? There's disciplines that us as CISOs have now been forced to go into, whether it's reaching across the aisle and dealing with, our supply chain teams on supply chain risk management. Because remember, CMMC is just a small portion of what you should be thinking about in a broader supply chain risk management plan. So what I'm seeing too is the necessary evolution of the role, right? More executive communications, more boardroom discussions, more collaboration across different silos within a company of whatever size, right? More plain English and soft skills needing to be leveraged to communicate the risk that we're seeing in industry and our executives are seeing on the TV every day. And that's why I get so excited about this time, right? Because it's not just CMMC, it's a lot of things coming together. You look at the executive order and secure software supply chain. Now I'm an SBOM expert, so I'm like, that's crazy, right? So it's just one of these things that I think, if you're in this business, just like CMMC, you have to evolve your practices. If you're in this business as a practitioner or executive, you need to evolve your approach as well.
Yep, and I think that's a good tangent. Thanks. You're right. It's because an expansion of the view. What are we looking at? What are we worried about? I've got one more kind of supply chain question, and this is from an audience question. Then I want to jump to some of your work with the AB Advisory Council. So this audience member asks, with prime contractors calling all prints as CUI, how does a small company subcontract, for example, painting, as the print calls for what is to be masked, et cetera? Is it really CUI? Do we really reduce the number of paint shops that can build this project? This is the everyday real world issue. So I guess let me try to cook that down a little bit. Is it really CUI? And at the time it came out of the government in an aggregated form, let's say it is, as it flows through the supply chain, that information keeps getting broken down into smaller and smaller chunks. Who and where and how do we decide, okay, it's not CUI anymore? Do we ever do that? And who does that? What do you think?
That is an awesome question. And I think that is the question on about, 300,000 DIB companies' heads here. So I think I'm going to tell you a very brief story that was pre-CMMC that I think will provide a little bit of insight into this too. Years ago, we had a very large assembly that we had to send out to get chemical filmed and painted. And the particular company did not use email. So we said, all right, we're going to take the big plotter size assembly. We are going to make a copy of the outline of this part. We're going to draw using a highlighter on what needed to be masked, and we're going to send it off. Parts came back. We sent those off. They came back. They were all wrong. And we looked at it and we said, they did exactly what it was that we told them to do, but we had accidentally left off some very important instructions that were found on page 1 under the notes. So there are, I think, some unintended consequences in the idea that we can limit pieces of prints or CUI or specifications and tell people just enough of whatever you need to know. But I think that what's being forgotten, I think to Mr. Frost's point, is that it's not always cut and dry. It's not just because I need this bracket anodized. Okay, well, yeah, there might be some masking notes, but oh, by the way, the note said before any I don't know, any sort of chemical film happened, it needed to be pre-penetrant, whatever. But there are all these different things that are happening, and the print itself, in my eyes, it can't always be broken down into bits and pieces. I am a firm believer that the government or the powers that be are going to have to be the ones to tell us what CUI is, period.
Mike?
I agree 100%. I have no further comments on that. I think we all have the same challenge.
And there's people who are trying to say, let's declare everything to be not CUI, but there's people going the other way saying, hey, if we don't know, let's protect it. I mean, how hard is it to build systems that are ready to protect CUI? Have we made it too hard? Is it easier than it should be? Can industry make it easier? There's all those questions, but I think ultimately, Allison's going to go where you said, we're going to need to share the data with whoever might need to see it, and those people are going to need to have the capability to protect it.
I don't think burying your head in the sand and saying, well, I don't get anything that's officially marked CUI, so I don't have CUI, is the right approach. It could be. It's your own business decision, right? But yeah. I think that's the wrong approach, right? It's going to be somewhere in the middle. As Allison mentioned, our customer needs to step up and say, this is CUI, and mark it appropriately and communicate it and effectively across all contracting officers. I think that's number one. And then number two, right, then we have an obligation to understand the nuances at that time and be able to ensure the marks continue in our own networks and also persist throughout our supply chains. But we're not there yet. There's no like making that look prettier at this point in time. We just simply aren't there yet.
Let me jump to how things are progressing with the CMMC accreditation body. So both of you are on the Industry Advisory Council. So first, thank you for volunteering your time for that very valuable role. We previously had a lot of visible progress. Lately, it seems like the pace is slow. Mike, you made a reference earlier that we're in kind of a pause. Reagan Edens joined us last week on this program, and he outlined that there's really a lot of behind the scenes work going on. He used an example of like the duck. It looks peaceful on top, but underneath the water, the little legs are moving very fast. Do you agree with that assessment? Is it full steam ahead? Is that what you're seeing, or are we in a pause?
Well, I don't speak for the accreditation body themselves, right? But I can tell you what we're doing in the IAC is full steam ahead in terms of, we're working hard to try to figure out a structure and a mechanism to capture feedback from industry to properly illuminate the processes and procedures being pursued by the accreditation body. And it's something that we're committed to as a body. Now, is it completely daunting and challenging? Absolutely, because there's only 15 of us. I don't know what the number is, but there's 15 or so, and we're looking at constituency of 300,000 companies. So it's very daunting, but I can tell you, we are working at it. But at the same time, we're waiting for feedback from the DoD on what the program will look like and how it's going to be structured and things like that. But I support what Regan said. I'm going to probably license that duck thing, because that sounded pretty cool. But they're forging ahead from the AB standpoint in terms of how are we going to get assessors trained and how we're going to get them ready to go and hit the ground running whenever they come out with the final rule and the structure of the program review. Allison, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, that's covered like 98% of it. The other 2% too, I think, is that it's CMMC, when it came to be, I think DoD was surprised at the response it received. I don't think they understood just how ill-prepared the DIB was. And I think that now they're taking these responses and they're trying to come up with the game plan. Now, that does not excuse the radio silence, in my opinion. I think that the silence is a problem because it fosters rumors and frustration and conjecturing. And to Mike's point, IAC, we're trying to we're plugging full steam ahead as if all we're trying to do right now is gather info, trying to come up with the information or the mechanism in which to gather this info. But in the meantime, the info we're getting is lack of clarity and how much is this going to cost me, and frustration like that really nobody can answer. And I know the AB has taken a lot of flack, and from me included, but the AB is waiting on DoD just as much as the IAC is, just as much as industry is, and small business. And if for no other reason, I wish that if anybody on DoD is listening now, we just want some info, whether even if it's, hey, we're still working on it or whatever, just give us an update. We know that DoD is not working to make sure businesses don't fold, because that's not the intent of CMMC. The intent of CMMC is to prioritize national security, and we 100% understand that. So now tell us what is on the horizon, what we all should be doing in the meantime.
I can tell you a solid bet. Just focus on 800-171 right now. It's in your contracts right now. It will get you, I'm not a math whiz, but no, 130 divided by 110. Well, it'll get you whatever percentage to CMMC level 3. And it's in 70, 12, 19, and 20 now. So
I think it's 83%, but I could be wrong. So
well, you're clearly a math whiz. You're much better than me.
So let me ask you about what you're telling the AB. I'm sure, because you guys are in a funnel position right now. All the industry talks to you because you're on the advisory council, and then you got to filter that through your own sense of priorities and reality before you give advice to the AB. What are the most important things that you're sharing with the AB as in that advisory council? What are you telling them?
Well, I know from the small business side and the industry folks is the assumption that small businesses and the expectations can be lumped in with every other business, whether it's medium or large or prime or not prime. And that's not to say to lower the bar for small business by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, there are lots of conversations about whether or not POAM should exist in this model and all of that. And I think the realistic assumption is, well, yeah, I mean, if you're going to get progress, again, progress, not perfection, we've got to get somewhere. And a lot of what I'm hearing personally is on needing clarity of where CMMC is right now today. And when, I know everybody's got that question, when can I get certified? Well, talk to the assessors who have yet to get their scoping guide, and then we'll kind of go from there. But those are really two of the biggest things I'm hearing right now.
Mike?
Yeah, and then, I think adding on top of that, we have a number of subcommittees that we're working on. We announced them at the town hall, I think 2 town halls ago. For me, it's similar to what I opened with here, was I'm very passionate about, based on kind of my history of being on the audit and consulting side, I'm very passionate about informing people about what's the intent of the requirement and what's the path to get there, right? And what best fits your business from an investment capability, along the spectrum of compliance. So we're working pretty hard interacting with C3POs and other organizations like that to try to come up with some reference architectures and items to really help. But again, we're a little hamstrung by the fact that we don't have the assessment guides and stuff like that yet. So a little bit in a waiting position, but I can assure you, like the conversations we have are extremely transparent and directed. And I've been extremely pleased personally with my participation, just being in those rooms and hearing the fact that we're really hitting on the crux of the issues, like really from the first meeting. So
that's good to hear. We are kind of at the end of our time. I'm going to ask a quick wrap-up question. Mike, you almost answered this last time. Before you said focus on 171. So here's my question, and we'll see if you want to change your answer or emphasize it. So, what's the I guess number one piece of advice for cybersecurity decision makers, right? One of the risks we talked about in this session was indecision, people that are in analysis paralysis mode. That can be as bad as making poor decisions, right? As you want to help us clear out the clutter and move forward, where do we focus our attention right now? What's the right now thing?
All right, I'll go first, and that way, Mike, you have the last word on this one because you've got some good stuff, I know. So no pressure or anything. So I believe that the takeaway is evaluate your own department or your own business and ask yourself, am I better than I was last month? And every month, ask yourself that. And if that means making a small change this month and a bigger change next month, MFA, incident response plan, policy writing, I mean, the stuff that you kind of hear ad nauseum, those things, those little things, they all add up, and they all ultimately are going to be what makes up, whether it's 800, 171, CMMC, CMMC do, whatever ends up popping up, that's what the impact is going to be.
Love it.
It's a hard one to follow, right? I think what that speaks to, though, is your intent, right? I've always said, my job as a CISO, I can't control everything, right? But I can do everything I can to focus the proper investments, communicate the risks, and attempt to make the most informed decisions. If I can do that, I can look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day and say, I did a good job, right? Regardless of incidents and recoveries and stuff like that, I know that I can look in the mirror. And I think that speaks to what you're saying, Allison, is remember the intent of this, right? Remember the fact that it's progress, not perfection. Start somewhere. And I think the last thing is ask for help. I've actually been very surprised in my position as a GDIT CISO, also kind of pretty public on LinkedIn in terms of, hey, hit me up, I'll help you. I've been really surprised by the lack of people that have actually taken me up on that within my own supply chain. So I would say, to Allison's point, as you're on that journey, right, trying to make that iterative progress, given the extra time that you have, ask for help, right? You have different DoD mechanisms and things like Project Spectrum and things like that. You have your own supply chains to talk to. You have the IAC. You have this big bad world called LinkedIn that's mostly helpful, right? Leverage that, right? We are a gigantic and seemingly more interesting community by the day. So please leverage this dynamic community to make that change that Allison said.
Thanks to you both. This was a great session, really good advice. I think, very, very practical, very actionable, good insights. My windows are changing size on me here. I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank the audience members for your time and attention. Please do join us for future town hall meetings. Our next session is going to be Wednesday, August 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Our guest is going to be Karen Evans. She's the former CIO of DHS and now in outside of the public sector, working in the private sector. So interested in getting her insights into how CMMC might play in other agencies beyond the DoD. We've heard some rumors in that regard, so we want to get her insights on that. So please join us for that session, Wednesday, August 25th. If you need any details of those sessions, you can go to our website, neosystemscorp.com. Thanks, everybody.